almost be dead when he would hit me, and then my blood golem would hit him and would pump it right back up. So it was a constant, like, 30-minute battle of just back and forth like that.
Yo-yo.
And then sometimes he would hit me a little hard, or my blood golem would miss, or something like that, and then I'd die, and then I'd have to run back and go through the whole charade again. Diablo was even worse, though. That was like a 2-hour fight.
That's a good way to end it. And then I died. To me, the actual time length gameplay-wise was really dependent on which class and build you chose. Because certain ones were fantastic late game, and you see them so commonly now, but people don't start out with those builds. They don't do it because they don't have the items to start out with.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people kind of cheat the system in that respect, in that they almost forget that if you don't have items for those things, you're not going to be able to do it all that easily. You have to hold back and stay behind a good portion of the game before you can move on.
Yeah, there's a bunch of builds that I've looked up, and they looked interesting, but then they're like, yeah, this revolves around the Armageddon rune word. And I'm like, what?
And what if I don't have that per se?
Because now the reason why I asked the question about game length is because I was watching a bunch of videos on the Spoonie experiment, and he's been going back through the old Ultima games, which come from similar stock, very Dungeons and Dragons based. In fact, even more so with the Ultima games, and just remembering what the solutions to some of these old puzzles were, like, what was it like back in the good old days, or however you want to put it. And things like, it's like, well, you travel to this other planet and you find a guy, and if you offer him 500 gold, he will give you the keyword. You give the keyword to this other guy, and that guy will tell you to go talk to the guy under the tree. But the guy under the tree will pretend not to know you. But if you bluff him into accepting your money, then he'll give you the hilt of the sword. But to get the blade of the sword, you need to go crawl into the forge and past the blacksmith, and the blacksmith will be like, what are you doing? Just these bizarre Byzantine solutions to puzzles, and these extremely long, complex, I wouldn't even call them puzzles, just the quantity of things that you used to need to do in order to accomplish games. They had they had play times running well in excess of 60 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, like, I would probably eyeball that a naked Diablo 2 run is probably still going to clock you somewhere around 40 because of the need to get gear, and especially if you don't know how to handle the boss. It's probably still going to come in around 40 hours. And I suppose a question that may be a little bit subversive among the Diablo community is, does it have to be a 40-hour game? Does it have to be a 60-hour game?
It's always a question as far as that's concerned, but like you say, one of the major aspects to the Diablo series is that most of these things do end up taking a lot of time, based solely on that one factor, which is just, gear. Because your power level is based more on gear than it is any other single factor. Assuming that you're just not, completely retarded with your build.
Which I was.
Which was very easy to be.
Yeah. Especially if you didn't have access to the internet or other people.
Right.
Older and wiser.
It was especially...
That sounds good.
It was especially difficult because the vast majority of builds that existed within the game were worthless. I mean, there's really no two ways around it. That's the nature and reality of the game and how it was designed. Yeah. And I say that with all experience because there are plenty of builds that I've tried that are just about impossible to make work, because you literally would have to have the most ridiculous rune word, merc setup, and everything else to make it actually work in hell mode. You can make pretty much...
Why is my bone spear not killing Diablo?
You can pretty much make anything work in normal mode. You can make a rabies druid right now and make it work, but if you don't have the right items, most anything even remotely outlandish will fail horribly, even by the time you hit a certain stage in Nightmare.
Right.
So a lot of it does just come down to those little things. It's like, why is this failing? Well, It's just the way that the game was designed. They never intended for someone to max out Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And it really seems silly to be able to put more than 1 point into something that is only useful as a prerequisite, but that's just how the game was designed.
Then they introduced synergies in an effort to make you put more points into useless spells.
Yeah.
Well, but again, going back, sort of, the concept of the time was, even if Inferno isn't that good of a spell, it has to have 20 ranks, because spells have 20 ranks.
Right.
That's what spells have, is they have 20 ranks. And, value isn't a question. It's a spell. It has 20 ranks.
Yes, it does.
So yeah, I mean, it all goes back to what I was saying before. With the new skill system, they're not trying to make trash skills that you just use at lower levels, put 1 point in, and move on. They want each skill to be a viable option for you. If you want to use that skill throughout the whole game, then you're going to be able to. With runes and change it up and make it more powerful, it's going to be friggin' awesome.
The thing that strikes me as the most interesting about that topic, though, is how they merged the two together. Because remember, in Diablo 1, you didn't learn skills. You either found them or bought them. They were books. Anyone could learn them. As long as you had the right stat requirement, you could learn any spell. So, as it turns out, when you really think about how the rune system works now, it is a little bit of a throwback, isn't it? Because you can actually improve your spell abilities with something that you find, that it actually attaches to the skill itself. And that's not something that we've seen at all in Diablo 2, is only found, like I say, in either Diablo 1 or the upcoming game with Diablo 3.
So, plus skill items to a certain degree in Diablo 2.
Well, those actually also did exist in Diablo 1.
But they did, they were in Diablo 1 as well. So.
But it still fell under the auspices of, this is an item.
Yeah.
This is what the item does. It improves your power. Whereas, like I say, Diablo 3 is the first time since Diablo 1 that it actually improved the skill directly and wasn't item-based. You could be naked and still have this effect.
Nice.
I just heard naked, and so no, sorry.
Man, I do kind of miss the I miss the.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I miss the thrill of finding a book. I miss the rush that I got from seeing a book drop, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, and then walking up to those, finding a room with a bookcase, and you're like, yes, new skill, new spell.
You know what I miss about that?
Book of Inferno,
yeah, that's exactly it. Yes, phasing rank 12. Woo!
Or you were stoked when you walked into one of those rooms and
it's got 3 bookshelves: Inferno, Static Shock, and Phasing.
Or Nova. Nova was so good in Diablo 1.
Well, you couldn't actually learn Nova in Diablo 1.
Or not Flash. But
there you go.
Is that what? That's what. Yeah, that's what Static Shock was called at the time. It was called Flash, right? Yeah.
Well, Flash and Static Charge didn't actually work the same way. Flash was just an AoE blast of magic damage directly around your target in melee range.
Useless spell.
So
never used it.
Did no damage.
I mean, you looked at it and you thought, wow, this must be an awesome skill. And then you try it, and of course you're inevitably disappointed. You're like, oh.
You're like, that didn't kill stuff, but I'm dead now.
No. Like, maybe if I made a warrior and maxed out Flash, that would just be amazing. No, it wouldn't. It would just be a very tragic waste of your time.
To go back to the game length, I'm hoping for 40 plus hours to make it through Diablo 3, because I don't know, I've been running back through Act 3 and looking at all the stuff, and there's a lot of cool art assets and just ideas that they came up with that really get skipped nowadays with the whole rushing thing, that they're putting a lot of effort into designing Diablo 3, that I'm hoping rushing won't be just one of those things where you skip the whole act, where one act in the game becomes a whole 10-minute affair to skip past and you miss all the art they put into it and the work and time.
Well, that, and because they don't want the end game being running the exact same thing over and over, the more kind of variety and content they have in the game, the more you'll actually see it all as well. It'll be sweet. So you won't just be like spending all your time in the last act killing the last boss. You might actually be spending your time in, Act 1, Act 3.
So we're done with Diablo 2 Act 3. this week. We're going to talk about it more next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about. Quests, NPCs, level design, who knows. But yeah, look forward to that next week. But now we're going to jump into some news. And we got some tidbits from Jay Wilson and Bashiok.
And awesome ones at that.
Yeah. Jay Wilson did
good.
an interview for Diablo CC, which is a Chinese Diablo 3 fan site. I saw it on Diablo.inc Gamers. They had a little bit of translation from there on things that he talked about. And Ken, you want to lead us off with some of those tidbits?
Sure. Well, some of the smaller things, like the Necro, will return as an NPC, and Jay did give no comment on whether or not he'll return as a playable class in like an expansion or something. I don't think Jay is at the point where he'll give any information on an expansion, probably because there is no information to give on an expansion.
Yeah.
You got to finish the main game before you can think about an expo.
Interesting little tidbit. On the most recent Blizzcast that came out recently, they started doing video shows, and Diablo makes an appearance in there. They got some new art for him. And then there's also a Necro-looking like character on screen for a sec, standing in what looks like a destroyed monastery, or the destroyed, what's that place called? Tristram Cathedral in the doorway. So yeah, we'll put a link up to that in the show notes if you want to check that out. It was pretty cool. But the rest of the Blizzcast is dedicated to WoW, so there's no new Diablo information. Just video. Something to look forward to in the future. A Diablo Blizzcast. What a dream.
Dream on.
What else did Jay Wilson say?
I think the biggest thing that he talked about was that they took out binding items.
Yes.
For those who don't know, the binding items were items that once they were either equipped or picked up, depending on the item, you could no longer trade them even to your own characters. Like they were stuck on that character. And the idea behind that was to try and keep some of the high-end items out of the economy, keep them out, try and lessen the amount they have, kind of increase their rarity. And so that was out. He didn't really go into why, or maybe he did, hasn't been translated.
He didn't,
yet,
but Bashiok did.
Bashiok
did. Yep. So he said basically the reason they're not doing that, or they changed their mind on that, is because it just wasn't a good way to do it. They said their reasoning for it wasn't good enough, so they scrapped it, to be simple about it.
Yeah, I got his quote here. This is from Bashiok on the forums. He said, yeah, we realize that binding is kind of a crappy way to pull items out of the economy. If you say that the average player produces 100 items an hour and maybe gets one upgrade in that time, then binding at best can account for removing 1% of the items from the economy, and that's being very generous at high levels. Binding isn't really substantial in making a viable economy, but it's really good at establishing item prestige, which is how it's used in WoW. We expect salvaging to be compelling enough to remove good percentage of the most valuable items in the economy. High-end components obtained from salvaging high-end items are needed for high-end crafting and enchantment. We're not promising anything on patch content, but we also feel that keeping up on introducing new items consistently will keep it from being possible for a glut of the best items from building as the best that can be constantly moving target.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing if you think about it, because in Diablo 2, the way they accomplished the same goal was the ladder system, completely removing and wiping everything out in one fell swoop. If you wanted to play on ladder, you had to start all over whenever it happened. Whereas this was a good solution for Diablo 2 because Diablo 2 never really updated all that much, as we are so very well aware.
Yeah.
But given the fact that they're planning multiple expansions and things of that nature, it would make sense that they could actually maintain it in a more normalized system this way, because they would still have a cash flow to maintain the updates, and they would actually have a way of eliminating the best of the best by way of replacing them, just in a different format.
Now, I like the implications about the crafting system. How it's basically saying, it's like, yeah, all those SOJs, you're going to end up having to like shard 10 of them in order to make one SOJ version 2. which is basically the mentality there. He's saying it's like, yeah, we feel that the crafting system, and they go, Bashiok goes on to talk about legendaries and set items and so on. And really what it's sounding like is that the mentality there is there's going to be there's going to be like the